For years, a quiet rancher named Jedediah worked his land, never suspecting the secret buried right beneath his feet. His days were a familiar rhythm of mending fences, tending to his cattle, and watching the sun set over the vast, unforgiving frontier. He was a man of simple habits and even simpler expectations, content with the life he'd carved out for himself on the edge of civilization. But one sweltering afternoon, that simple life was about to be turned completely upside down. The old barn, a structure that had stood for decades, was showing its age. A few of the floorboards had begun to rot, and Jedediah, ever the practical man, decided it was time for repairs. He pried up a section of warped wood, the groan of the old nails echoing in the dusty air. As he cleared away the debris, his crowbar struck something solid, something that wasn't earth or rock. It gave off a dull, metallic thud. Curious, he dug around the object, his hands working faster as his intrigue grew. It was a ring, a heavy iron ring set into what looked like a solid wooden door, flush with the packed dirt floor. A trapdoor. He'd lived on this land for 20 years, worked in this barn almost every single day, and never once had he seen it. A cold knot of apprehension and excitement tightened in his stomach. With a grunt of effort, he pulled on the ring. The door was heavy, swollen with dampness and time. Inch by inch it gave way, revealing a dark, gaping hole. A wave of musty, cool air, smelling of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling, washed over him. Below, a rough-hewn ladder descended into blackness. His heart pounded against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to close the door and forget he ever saw it. But the call of the unknown was stronger. Lighting an old lantern, Jedediah took a deep breath and began his descent into the earth, unaware that he was stepping into a mystery that would unravel the very fabric of his town and test the limits of his own survival. The ladder was slick with moisture, and each rung creaked under his weight. The air grew colder, and the flickering light from his lantern cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the tunnel walls. The passage was narrow, clearly dug by hand, the sides reinforced with timber beams. It stretched forward into the suffocating darkness. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a small, cavern-like room. Jedediah raised his lantern, and his breath caught in his throat. Stacked against the walls were dozens of wooden crates, some branded with the insignia of the U.S. Army. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. In the center of the room, scattered across a makeshift table, were maps, telegraph equipment, and piles of documents. And lying beside them, glinting in the lantern light, were several freshly cleaned repeating rifles and boxes upon boxes of ammunition. This wasn't some old prospector's hideout. This was an active, well-supplied operation. But for what? And by whom? As he cautiously stepped closer to the table, his eyes fell upon a ledger. He opened it, his rough fingers tracing the columns of names and figures. The names were familiar, shockingly familiar. He saw the name of the town sheriff, the bank manager, even the mild-mannered blacksmith. Next to their names were dates and sums of money, payments for services rendered, a conspiracy. It was running right under his nose, right under the entire town. These men, pillars of the community, were involved in something deep and dangerous. But what? His question was answered when he found another set of documents tucked beneath a map. They were detailed plans, not for a robbery, but for an ambush. An ambush on the next federal payroll wagon, scheduled to pass just a few miles north of town in 3 days. The plan was meticulous, outlining every detail, from the lookout points to the planned escape route. The shock was like a physical blow. The men he shared a drink with at the saloon, the men who tipped their hats to his wife in the street, were planning to commit a federal crime that would undoubtedly end in bloodshed. Suddenly, a sound from the tunnel entrance echoed through the chamber, the scrape of a boot on the ladder. They were coming back. Panic seized him. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He doused his lantern, plunging the room into absolute blackness, and pressed himself into a narrow gap between two stacks of crates. He held his breath, his heart hammering so loud he was sure they could hear it. Two figures descended into the room, their voices low and tense. In the faint glow of their own lantern, Jedediah recognized them immediately. Sheriff Brody and Marcus Thorne, the owner of the town's largest saloon. "Everything is set," Brody said, his voice stripped of its usual folksy charm. "The lookout confirmed the wagon's on schedule. By this time next week, we'll be richer than we ever dreamed." Thorne grunted in agreement, his eyes scanning the crates of rifles. "And anyone who gets in our way?" he asked, his voice laced with menace. Brody just chuckled, a cold, empty sound. "The frontier has a way of swallowing people whole, Marcus. No one will ever know." Jedediah's mind raced. He couldn't go to the law. The law was standing right in front of him. He couldn't warn the town. Half the town was in on it. He was alone, trapped underground with a secret that could get him killed. He knew he had to get out, had to warn the federal marshals in the next county. But how? He waited, his muscles screaming in protest, until Brody and Thorne finished their check and ascended back up the ladder. He heard the heavy thud of the trapdoor closing above. He was trapped, but Jedediah was a rancher, a man accustomed to solving problems with what he had. He relit his lantern and began a frantic search of the room. He was looking for another way out, a ventilation shaft, anything. His search proved fruitless. The tunnel was a dead end. Despair began to set in. But then his eyes fell on the telegraph equipment. He didn't know how to use it, not really, but he'd seen the operator in town tap out messages, dots and dashes. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one he had. He found a manual detailing the codes. His hands shook as he powered the machine, hoping its battery still held a charge. The small device hummed to life. He started tapping, slow and clumsy at first. "Payroll ambush, 3 days. North Pass. Conspiracy. Help." He repeated the message over and over, praying someone, anyone, was listening. He didn't know if the signal was strong enough, or if anyone was even on the other end. He could only tap and hope. Hours turned into what felt like days. His supplies were gone, the lantern oil was low, and a grim sense of hopelessness was creeping in. He was about to give up when he heard it, a faint scraping from above. It wasn't the sound of the conspirators. It was different, more urgent. Several sets of boots. The trap door was thrown open, and this time the light that flooded the tunnel wasn't from a single lantern, but from the bright sun of the open day. A voice called down, "U.S. Marshals, anyone down there?" Relief washed over Jedediah so powerfully his knees buckled. He had been heard. Scrambling up the ladder, he emerged into the dusty sunlight of his own barn, blinking against the brightness. He was surrounded not by traitors, but by a posse of grim-faced U.S. Marshals, their guns drawn. His desperate, tapped-out message had been intercepted by a military outpost 50 miles away. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Armed with the ledger and Jedediah's testimony, the Marshals rounded up Sheriff Brody, Thorne, and over a dozen other men. The conspiracy that had festered in the shadows was brought into the light, shocking the frontier. The town was thrown into turmoil, trust shattered, but it was a necessary cleansing. Jedediah, the quiet rancher, was hailed as a hero. He never sought the attention, and when things settled down, he went back to his life of mending fences and tending cattle. But things were different. He had sealed the tunnel for good, but he never forgot the secret that lay beneath his barn. He knew, as few others did, just how thin the line between civilization and chaos truly was on the untamed frontier, and how one man's courage could change everything. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. We love bringing these tales of the Old West to life. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more shocking frontier secrets and gripping Western adventures. We'll see you in the next one.